The Houston Texans need to be looking for wide receiver help outside of the building after Tank Dell's injury. They maybe should have been looking before Tank Dell got hurt, but certainly after. Somebody outside the building to come in and help this Texans offense. Now, it's important to note, as I talk about wide receivers, none of these guys are going to change the game for the Texans. None of these players are going to massively improve this offense. It's all about just raising the floor even a little bit if they can. Somebody with experience who's played a little bit across the NFL that can help raise the floor just a tiny bit for this offense. And they're not going to help them out ahead of the Ravens game. Not enough time to get somebody in here, figure out what they do and don't know, and put them on the field. But if you get somebody in, play them against the Tennessee Titans, and hopefully have that player ready to help you out just a little bit in the playoff game, it would go a long way. A bunch of names here for you. Let's start with the one that we'll find out about the quickest. Deontay Johnson, the former Steelers, Panthers, and Ravens wide receiver, is currently on waivers. The Texans will need to submit a waiver claim, hope that no other team ahead of them in the waiver order claims him, and then we'll find out if they get him by Monday afternoon. Now, I know what you're thinking to yourself. Hey, didn't he get traded at the deadline to the Ravens, and it didn't really work out, and he even refused to go into a game for the Ravens? And yes, that is all true. The Ravens added Deontay Johnson from Carolina at the trade deadline for a late round pick, and then it didn't work out in Baltimore for whatever reason. Deontay Johnson wasn't happy. He did indeed refuse to go into a game for the Ravens, and sure, that's a little bit of a worry, but I have faith in DeMeco Ryans and I have faith in CJ Stroud that they would keep their locker room in order. Deontay Johnson showing up and wanting to play for a couple of games isn't going to upset the apple cart in the locker room. It isn't going to destroy things. People are worried about this guy ruining locker room chemistry. What's he going to do? Sleep with everybody's wives and girlfriends? That's not going to happen, okay? I have faith that DeMeco Ryans, CJ Stroud can run their locker room and keep a guy from like Deontay Johnson from being a squeaky wheel. And by the way, the commitment is minimal. You bring him in, you find out that he's not a good dude, you don't like him, see you later. Get out of here, Deontay Johnson. He's been a okay player in his career. A couple of years ago, he had a 1,000-yard season with 8 touchdowns. He's not quite that player, but earlier this year, in about 7 games with a crappy Carolina Panthers team, he was able to put up over 30 receptions and over 360 yards and 3 touchdowns. So that's pretty good numbers when you think about what Robert Woods and Xavier Hutchinson and John Mechie have for the totality of their season. Heck, it's even pretty good when you combine Woods and Mechie and Hutchinson together for the course of the season. Yeah, I know Deontay Johnson was a pseudo number 1 for a bad Panthers team, but his production outproducing 3 guys over the course of a season and him doing it in basically 7 games, look, he could help this Texans team. He's played a lot of football, and he would be a somewhat nice addition to this wide receiver room. Again, you can't help you for Baltimore, but get him in the building, get him with the crash course, play him a little bit against Tennessee to get the rust knocked off because he hasn't played a ton with Baltimore, and then find a way to use him in the playoff game against whoever you eventually play in the playoffs. Deontay Johnson's the top of my list, but the Texans can't guarantee that they get him because he's on waivers. After that, the ability for this player to affect the team drops off significantly. You'll recognize this next name, but I don't know that there's much left. Odell Beckham Jr. is the name that I'd recommend. He's at least in football shape because he's been playing some this season for the Miami Dolphins. He's played in a couple of offshoot offenses, not too dissimilar from the Houston Texans with his time in Miami and his time with the Los Angeles Rams. And well, he's played a lot of football. Did I mention that? Look, I don't believe there's much left to Odell Beckham. I've used the term that he's more washed than your favorite sweatshirt, but experience is what you'd be betting on. He's played a lot of football. He's played a lot of important football. Of course, was really good for the Rams on their run to the Super Bowl. So that would be what you're betting on if you go with Odell Beckham. He's a free agent. You can guarantee that you get him. And at this point, the magnitude of Odell Beckham's personality seems to be less than an issue. You didn't hear a bunch of squeaky wheel stuff out of Miami when he wasn't getting the ball. Just 9 receptions for 55 yards from Beckham this season. For the Dolphins, Again, physically, I don't believe a lot is there, but you'd be betting on experience. You'd be betting on a guy that has some experience in a similar style of offense coming in and being able to help you a little bit after that. Now, I told you that these names would drop off. Boy, the names start to drop off. I scoured free agency and I tried to find anybody for the Houston Texans. And these are some of the other names that I came up with. Chris Moore, you remember him in the David Culley era Texans? Chris Moore previously played this year for the Arizona Cardinals, and he was, well, not good. He didn't record any stats for the Cardinals, but at least he'd be in football shape if he stayed with it after he was released in early November by the Cardinals. You remember the name Richie James? Richie James previously played in San Francisco, so he knows this offense, but Richie James hasn't come close to being on a roster here in 2024. Hunter Renfrow. Renfrow was awesome for the Raiders a couple of years ago. Then he wasn't very good, and now he's not even in football, and I'm not so sure that he's even had a workout or two over the course of this season. Denzel Mims is a former second-round pick by the Jets who couldn't stick with the Jacksonville Jaguars in training camp. And then Byron Pringle, who played previously for the Kansas City Chiefs, couldn't make the Washington Commanders in training camp. Those are just names for you to consider. And maybe when you get to the Chris Moores, the Hunter Renfrows, the Denzel Mimses, and the Byron Pringles, maybe at that point it is better to look towards the practice squad players. Maybe making Jared Wayne a permanent fixture on this roster, or perhaps Johnny Johnson III, who's on the practice squad and has been with the organization for a couple of years, or Xavier Johnson, who is a rookie on the practice squad. Maybe they are better than some of those final names that I mentioned, but if the Texans can get Deontay Johnson, they got to go out there and get Deontay Johnson. If they think about Odell Beckham, it's worth kicking the tires and at least having the conversation in the building. Again, the player that you'd be adding is not some game changer. The player that you'd be adding is just somebody you can trust to move the floor of this team up just a little bit. You just got to move it just a tiny bit. It doesn't have to be some massive game-changing development, just a player that raises the floor a little bit from putting somebody like Jared Wayne or Johnny Johnson or Xavier Johnson from the practice squad on the field while they've been in the building, don't have a lot of NFL experience. I lean more towards having a little bit more experience in that final role and helping out that way than having a little bit of a younger player, even though they have been in the building and are very familiar with the offense, having been practicing with it all season long. What say you? You want a waiver claim on Deontay Johnson? Maybe go down the Odell Beckham path? Did any of those other names sound intriguing to you at all? I certainly understand if they didn't. The Texans need the guys that have been playing, Nico Collins, Robert Woods, Xavier Hutchinson, and John Mechie, to step up the most, but you could add a veteran to help them out and maybe raise the floor just a tiny bit as well. Appreciate you watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I can't wait until we talk Texans again soon.